The next show will start in 1 minute.
Streaming live from the Paul and Catherine Ranke Memorial Studio, this is TV Free Baltimore. Support for TV Free Baltimore comes from viewers like you. Become a TV Free Baltimore member by visiting patreon.com/TV Free Baltimore.
As a public service, TV Free Baltimore provides a digital soapbox for those the mainstream media ignores. The opinions expressed in this live stream are not necessarily those of the owners, management, or underwriters of TV Free Baltimore. Furthermore, TV Free Baltimore streams hyper-local content focusing on politics and entertainment in the Baltimore viewing area.
Hi, this is Cindy Williams, and you're watching TV Free Baltimore.
Hi, hi, I'm Dawn Wells, and guess what? You are watching TV Free Baltimore.
You're watching Maryland Politics here on TV Free Baltimore. Good evening and welcome to another episode of Maryland Politics. We're here tonight to talk about the pending tax increases in Baltimore County that were introduced by the newly elected county executive. And he wants to raise property taxes via higher assessments. He wants to take the income tax rate in Baltimore County and raise it from 2.8% up to 3.2%. He also wants to tax cell phones, cable, television, and a few other things. And it's my pleasure tonight to introduce an esteemed economist that's coming to talk about these tax hikes and what it's going to mean to Baltimore County's tax base. Good afternoon. Please introduce yourself to our audience.
Sure. My name is Anirban Basu. I am an economist. My company's name is Sage Policy Group Incorporated, and we are located in downtown Baltimore, Maryland.
Okay, let's talk about the current tax base within Baltimore County. With all these taxes that the county executive wants to bring to Baltimore County, what do you think is going to be the effect to the behavior of Baltimore County residents? And first and foremost, do you think that this is going to push yet more residents out of Baltimore County?
Well, let me take that second question first. Yes, I do. This is a county that's already losing population. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, for the last year for which data are available, the county lost 172 people. And the biggest source of loss of population was something called domestic net migration, meaning that more people are moving out of Baltimore County than moving in. This is remarkable because Baltimore County, of course, borders a jurisdiction that is losing population even faster. During that same one-year period, Baltimore City lost more than 7,000 people, and one would think that the county that wraps around Baltimore City would be gaining a lot of population in the context of that urban population loss, but more people actually are moving out than moving in. And so the question policymakers and other stakeholders need to ask is, what's wrong with Baltimore County? Why are so many people moving out? What is causing that? And my feeling is that if we raise taxes on cable bills, cell phone bills, personal income, hotels, Airbnb, so on and so forth, and also initiate impact fees in Baltimore County, more people will move out and fewer people will move in, and this tax base will not grow the way it needs to grow to meet our various needs.
I completely agree with that, and I recently had a very interesting conversation with somebody on Facebook about having a healthy tax base and how raising taxes will actually push wealth out of the county, which will degrade the tax base. If you have a tax base made up of poor people, Section 8 renters, and welfare recipients, that's a completely different situation than having businesses, entrepreneurs, and small business owners in your political jurisdiction. And one of the things that here at TV Free Baltimore that we've talked about repeatedly is how wealth has left Baltimore County. And I'm going to bring up a map here which shows how much wealth the Baltimore County has lost since I believe it's 1993. But this is a very telling map because you can see that if you look down here, okay, it says wealth is being, even though the county overall is losing wealth, wealth is being gained from people moving out of Baltimore City and Prince George's County. So as people move out of Baltimore County, they're being backfilled by people from Baltimore City mainly, but the people coming in from Baltimore City obviously don't have the money that the people have that have left. So that's very important to have a healthy tax base. And also I think people on the political left will argue that higher tax rates mean greater government services, but that's not necessarily true, because if that were true, Baltimore City would have the greatest government services in the world because their tax rates are higher by far than any other Maryland political jurisdiction, but yet that local government, Baltimore City, cannot provide the most basic services that only a government can provide. And first and foremost is public safety. So tax rates are very important in maintaining a healthy tax base and having the government being able to provide the services that only a government can provide. So in your travels, have you looked at the amount of wealth that have been fleeing Baltimore County?
Yeah, you can see that reflected in many things, including how difficult it has become in much of the county to sell an expensive home. For a long time, this was a county to which wealth moved in large amounts. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with people from the city moving to the county. I myself moved from the city to the county. I don't view myself as being especially problematic from a Baltimore County perspective, but we are losing a lot of wealth. Now, when I have to ask the question, why? If wealthy people are moving to Florida, which, as it turns out, has no state income tax, or other places to the south because the weather is better there in their estimation, there's not much a Towson-based policymaker can do about that. But if people are moving out of Baltimore County, including people of means, because they feel overtaxed, underserved, they're worried about emerging public safety issues, that's a problem. And if they feel strongly enough about that to leave the county, my guess is that other people feel pretty strongly about these things who haven't yet left, and that higher taxes, including higher personal income taxes, could be the lever that throws them out of Baltimore County effectively, which leaves us, of course, with a smaller tax base. And that's sort of the Baltimore City story, isn't it? Baltimore City taxed its tax base out of existence over the course of decades. It's a city that had 950,000 people as of 1950. The last census estimate suggests that it's just a bit above 600,000. They didn't get to that circumstance by maintaining, low taxes, excessively low taxes. They got to that circumstance by creating a poor value proposition for the taxpayer, and the taxpayer voted with their feet, often to Baltimore County, but many other places as well.
Completely agree with that. And we had Dee Hodges in here about a year ago, and she really brought me up on the speed on a couple things. I didn't know that Maryland has both an inheritance tax and a death tax. And also, I just found out that they do tax individual retirement accounts. So, we have a big problem in Maryland with what is termed snowbirds. So people are leaving Maryland because it was just ranked the worst state to retire in. And part of the reason was the inheritance tax, the death tax, and also taxing individual retirement accounts. Now, I don't know if the taxing of the IRAs is they're actually taxing Roth IRAs or just regular IRAs for people in retirement. But because of the inheritance tax and the death tax, there are people that are not going to be able to retire in place, age in place, as they say. And it's these tax policies of not only the state, but also, as you touched on, Baltimore City, are pushing people with money out. And it's just, I don't understand how people, the politicians of Baltimore County, can think that raising all these taxes is a good idea when we're literally sitting right next to Baltimore City. And you can see the effects that high tax rates have on a population. People that are productive are going to leave, and they're going to take their tax dollars with them. And then when you add in the other things that I guess we have to include in this conversation, but doesn't have to deal with money, but the quality of life in Baltimore County. I've lived in Baltimore County my whole life, and I can tell you that the quality of life is going down. The traffic, in the Baltimore area is literally going insane. But, the community that I've lived in my whole life, when I was growing up, it was sort of kind of like Mayberry, and now Parkville is looking more like Pigtown. I go up to the grocery store, I come out, there's a couple of junkies there now begging for money. And so you have a quality of life that's going down. Even where we're at today in Lansdowne, okay? Just what was it last week when a 78-year-old woman went grocery shopping and she was shot by 2 drug dealers and killed? When that sort of thing starts happening, people aren't going to stick around. And then to have a newly elected county executive, come in and say, hey, not only is the quality of life going down, but now we're going to charge you all these greater taxes. When I went over to Towson to hear the public hearing on these tax increases, you were the only one that touched on people leaving. And I was shocked that Baltimore County lost almost 200 residents. And if you look at the data, that's shocking because of all the people that are coming in from Baltimore City. You would think that the population would grow, but if Baltimore County population is starting to do exactly what Baltimore City's population did 50 years ago, we're in trouble. The county's tax base will be in trouble. And why do you think that the politicians that were just elected, that are in power, aren't talking about these things?
One of the lessons of being an elected official with a 4-year term is that if you're going to raise taxes, raise them early in your term, so that by the 4th year when you run for re-election, people have forgotten about it or become accustomed to it, and it's not the big news of the day. But that's rather cynical, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Because, I agree, we have major issues in Baltimore County. And in fact, I think what you can see is that some of the issues that we have that are emerging in Baltimore County are very similar to the issues that the city has been wrestling with for decades. And so how do you deal with that? You don't deal with that by pushing out the existing tax base, because that leaves fewer resources with which to deal with those issues. I will also say, and I think you bring this point up as well, that, and you make the point well, which is that part of the problem for Baltimore County, and indeed jurisdictions across the state, is the state of Maryland and its tax rates. We are the only state in the country to maintain both an inheritance tax and an estate tax. We're it. We used to share that distinction, that dubious distinction, with folks from New Jersey, but we no longer do, because New Jersey actually reformed their tax code. We maintain some of the highest personal income tax rates in the country, including, of course, on high-income earners. And then we maintain a quite high corporate tax rate of 8.25%. So what are you doing with this tax code? You are driving wealth out of the state, or alternatively, you are putting up a roadblock to wealth and investment moving into the state. And Baltimore County, of course, exists in that context. And so part of the issue here is Maryland versus Florida, but part of the other issue here is Baltimore County versus Howard County, or Baltimore County versus Carroll County, or Harford County. And one of the things that we're seeing is more people are moving out of Baltimore County to those other jurisdictions, in part because those other jurisdictions don't have some of the emerging social issues that we in Baltimore County have. Don't get me wrong, we need resources to address those issues, whether it relates to student achievement or street crime or whatever it happens to be, or the character and nature of our parks. But you can't fund broad prosperity by driving out a tax base. Baltimore City tried to do that, and they succeeded in driving out the tax base. They have not succeeded in creating broadly shared prosperity.
No, no, they have not. And I see the elected officials, or the newly elected officials, going down the same path. I think the recipe that destroyed Baltimore was a quality of life that declined, taxes that went up, and crime that went up. And if you look at Baltimore County, it's all trending in that direction now. And I think that because of the influx of people from Baltimore City and County into Baltimore County, the county is becoming more democratic. And I think we may see the day where there may no longer be Republicans on the Baltimore County Council. It might take 10 years, maybe 20 years, but something that I found shocking, and I'm going to throw this wild card out here, but if you look at PG County, Baltimore City, and the other DC suburb, they're all controlled lock, stock, and barrel by Democrats. And CBS News just listed those three political jurisdictions as some of the deadliest counties in the United States. And I'm afraid that Baltimore County is going to go in that direction. And one of the things that I think is extremely bad is one-party rule in any political jurisdiction. You need competition. You need people to be able to get up and say, I'm for this, and the other guy's for that. And then people get to choose, and you get a healthy balance of good, hardworking people from both sides of the aisle and good ideas from both sides of the aisle. And I see that slipping away in Baltimore County. And, you know, the Democrats have ruled Baltimore City for 50 plus years. And I mean, my God. And I was a community activist down in Baltimore City. I own property in Baltimore City. And I can tell you, it was so frustrating trying to deal with the government down there. And with the nonprofits and trying to get things done the right way. And so I think Baltimore County is changing politically because of citizen migration within the state, and I think it's changing politically. I think one could argue that the election of Johnny Odleski is a step further to the left for the local Democratic Party in Baltimore County. I'm not sure anybody would argue with that, but his ideas of what he wants to do in this county just amaze me. I think there's a common saying out there that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. I think the guy has very good intentions, but I think that he's leading the county in the wrong direction, and these tax hikes are just I don't get it. And the fact that it just didn't seem to be brought up. What do you think, if all these tax hikes take place, what do you think that's going to do to the long-term health of this county?
Let me just say one, that whether folks are Democrat or Republican, it's immaterial to me. I'm an economist. I want good public policy that leads to fiscal sustainability and broadly shared prosperity. That's it. And if it's Republican like Reagan or a Democrat like Clinton and they pursue good policies and America does well, then I don't really care much about whether they're Republican or Democrat. And I would agree with the point, of course, that we need political competition. The competition is good. Any economist would say that in any context. And that
Right.
when you've got one-party rule effectively in America, you don't have that competition. You don't have a robust marketplace of ideas. And I agree that that's part of the Baltimore City problem. And by the way, I would say the same thing for a jurisdiction that was completely governed by Republicans and had very little Democratic influence. So
Amen.
You want a robust marketplace of ideas. But with respect to the tax increases and what that might mean for Baltimore County, here's what I think. I think that it accelerates population loss. I think that it accelerates out-migration. I think that it stunts private investment into Baltimore County, because one of the things that's been proposed are impact fees on new development. We want, for instance, I think, more of a commercial tax base. Why? Because if you've got more of a commercial tax base, that means you've got more employers in the county. That's good for residents looking for jobs. And also, if you've got more of a commercial tax base, that puts less pressure on the residential tax base to fund services. And one of the reasons that we have this roughly $80 million shortfall in Towson is we didn't grow the tax base fast enough in Baltimore County for many years. And one of the reasons for that is we weren't sufficiently pro-economic development, pro-investment, pro-private sector. Business of America is business. Business is not the enemy. I hear from so many people who love the employee, hate the employer. That makes no sense to me. And so I think we have a problem in Baltimore County if these tax rates are in fact, or tax increases are in fact implemented, that we have a problem here, that already the value proposition for taxpayers is insufficient, inadequate, even to maintain our population. Don't get me wrong, again, we have plentiful needs. We need at least 3 new high schools in this county. Lansdowne happens to be one of them, Towson is another, Delaney is another. We need resources. But you don't get resources, certainly not into the long term, by chasing away your best taxpayers. And we've been doing that for too long in Maryland, now too long in Baltimore County, and we continue to move in that direction. It's the wrong direction. And we've got to take a step back and ask the question, how do we get more people to stay here, and how do we get more people to come here and be taxpayers, and then help fuel broadly shared prosperity by broadening and expanding that tax base?
Completely agree, and I don't want anybody to think that I'm a Republican, because I'm not, and that I want Republicans in office, but a 2 or 3 party system works much better than having just one political party completely dominate politics in one political jurisdiction. But I think with the migration that's going on, I think Baltimore County is going to join other jurisdictions within Maryland to where it's just all Democrats, and I don't think that's healthy. Let's take the whole picture up a little bit, and let's talk about what happened in Annapolis this year. Kerwin, an expensive bill that we're all going to have to pay. So in Governor Hogan's opinion, and in mine and some other people, you had a General Assembly that overspent, and that they're going to come back next year and say, we've got a shortfall now. Now we have to raise state taxes. So you've got this huge education bill, Kerwin, that's got to get paid if it's going to be fully funded. And then you've got other things that they've spent money on down in Annapolis. And then you've got Baltimore County raising taxes. So again, I'm going to ask you, with Annapolis overspending, just like Baltimore County, I'll argue overspent during the last county executive term. So I think that they're it's a sophisticated way for them to spend a lot of money without mentioning taxes until after the fact. All the bills do, we've got a shortfall, we've got to raise taxes. And I think Johnny Oleski's town hall meetings that he held around the county, I think that was just prepping the message and kind of putting his toes in the water to see if there were going to be a lot of people fighting out there. But what do you think that the spending that took place in Annapolis this last session is going to be a double whammy for Baltimore County residents?
Well, look, the Kerwin Commission involved a lot of wonderful, brilliant people. We do have a problem in Maryland in terms of the character of public education and the outcomes. I'm not suggesting to you that spending more money necessarily solves those problems, but there are certain things that came out of the Kerwin Commission that, as an economist, I am certainly on board with. One example is the emphasis placed on career and technical education, what once people might have called vocational training, but creating another pathway for people to graduate high school and to have prospects upon the end of 12th grade, even if those prospects don't involve college. I think that's very valuable. But you're right, there's no question, and I think the folks on the Kerwin Commission would agree to this, that the price tag associated with each of these recommendations, or all of these recommendations, is pretty lofty. Again, here's the thing. If you want to fund schools more aggressively, do you know what you do? You grow the tax base faster. You become a leader in economic development. You don't maintain a corporate tax rate of 8.25% that induces people to go to Virginia or the Carolinas. You compete. You fight for jobs. You fight for private investment. You fight for commercial tax base. And of course, in the process of inducing more businesses to locate here, you also create higher personal income tax payments as well. That's how you do this. That's how you have a first-class, world-class educational system that's fully funded. You grow the tax base. And I think what's happening here is that, in many cases, I'm not just talking about the Thornton Commission, but there are too many people that think that the key to prosperity is just raise taxes, you'll get more revenues, and then you spend that on public services, everyone's happy. Here's the problem. Capital is mobile. And if you don't have a good taxpayer value proposition, some of your taxpayers are going to move. And you know who moves more likely than not? The people who pay the most taxes. Well, who do you least want to lose the people who pay the most taxes. And so, yeah, there's lots of issues here, whether in Annapolis or in Towson. I agree that policymaking is pushing in the, in some sense, the wrong direction, at least along the dimension of taxes. Again, I think we need better education in Baltimore County. I think everyone agrees that we need better education in Maryland, so on and so forth. We want newer school buildings, and we want better trained teachers, and we want better career pathways for our kids that are not going on to college, all of those things. But you don't get there by chasing away the tax base, because you might fund it for 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, but in year 10, 15, 20, the tax base is gone, and now you're cutting back. So we have to have a conversation as a state and as a county about how we expand this tax base and why it has not grown rapidly in years past. What have we been doing wrong, and what have the Carolinas and the Colorados been doing right? And then we can get there and have the resources that we want to invest in our schools, our public safety, our bridges, so on and so forth.
Okay, if you were the county executive, what would be the 3 things that you would do to ensure a healthy tax base for the long term?
Yeah, we need more taxpayers. So I probably would not increase income taxes. I might not lower them. I believe the rate currently is in the range of 2.83%, but I wouldn't necessarily lower them, because there is this fiscal shortfall and coming out of the previous administration, county executive administration. So, but I certainly wouldn't raise them. Not until I fully understood why people were making the decisions that they were, whether to leave the county or come into the county. What's driving that? I mean, are we as a county, for instance, attracting enough young professional families? There's some millennials, for lack of a better term, living in Baltimore, the city of Baltimore. They often lease very pricey apartments, often embedded within new construction or newly renovated buildings, often downtown. And they're forming households in larger numbers. They are escaping their 20s and moving into their 30s in very large numbers. And when they form those households, these professionals, my hope is that they choose Baltimore County a fair proportion of the time. But my fear is that as we put more and more roadblocks to investors, developers, and as we potentially raise the personal income tax, more of them will decide, no, I'm moving to Harford County. I'm moving to Carroll County. I'm moving to Howard County. And I'm going to add to already quite robust tax bases, leaving Baltimore County behind. That's what I would be thinking about as county executive. How do we grow this commercial tax base? How do we attract more professional young families and other families to Baltimore County so that we have more people sharing the burden, and that the burden on each one of us, therefore, is reduced, not expanded? But of course, that has not been the approach so far in Towson. The approach has been, well, let's float a bevy of tax increases, and let's see which ones stick in this first year of an administration.
Once again, completely agree with you. We need a healthy tax base. We need to draw in businesses and individuals that have good paying jobs. And it's not a big secret. If you want to attract those people, let them keep more of their own money. They've earned it. But also, if you go beyond tax rates, we can have a conversation about fees. Okay, I'm someone that likes to fish, but maybe 3 or 4 times a year. I was just talking to somebody else that does the same thing, and both of us just stopped fishing because we're not going to go and pay these high fees to get a fishing license just to fish 2, 3, 4 times a year. So we don't fish anymore. So they're losing money because they raised it was actually Martin O'Malley that raised the fees on fishing license and fees on all kinds of stuff. So again, I think if you want to attract people in, you allow people to keep more of their own money. And the fact that Baltimore County has a lower income tax rates than the surrounding counties, that's a good thing. That would attract people into the county. So I think that I just think that Baltimore County is unfortunately going to become the new Baltimore City, particularly inside the Beltway. I think the leaders that we have in power right now are leading us down the same worn-out paths that the leaders in Baltimore City did. And I agree with everything you said. And again, it's not a matter of Republican, Democrat. It's good public policy. What's the best policy to have the healthiest tax base? What's that sweet spot to where the rate is low enough to where you get the maximum amount of tax dollars? That's what they should be searching for. Not saying, well, we need all this money, we need all this money. Well, couple ways to get it, and the way you guys are doing it right now. I mean, after going to that thing, I don't even know if I should say this publicly, but about a week later, I called my father up, who's now in North Carolina, said, I think I'm going to leave Maryland. And my family's been here since 1830. Just, if I can't keep the money that I earn, and I'm getting towards retirement age, Maryland was just listed as the worst state to retire in. It's like they leave people like me no choice. So do you have any closing thoughts on what Baltimore County should do for its to maintain its viability, its tax-based viability?
I mean, honestly, it's going to sound like a silly answer, but I think you ask people who have left why they left. I think that's an important thing to understand. What drove you away? Could we have kept you? Are you spending 6 months in a day in Florida? And is that because of state personal income taxes, not so much county personal income taxes, though of course they add up together. And so that's the kind of thing I'd want to know before you, or one, slapped on a set of additional tax increases, including on cell phone bills. And some of these tax increases are pretty regressive, as it turns out. They take more income out of the hands of lower income households and higher income households. And I'm surprised that some of these policies are so aggressive. But in any case, that's what I'd want to know about. I will say as a final thing that I'll never leave Maryland. I'll never leave the Baltimore region. This region's been everything to me. Gave me the life I have. And so I'm going to fight for the quality of life here and advocate for good public policies, whether on taxes or public safety or whatever it happens to be. But I will say that over the last few years, we've gotten a lot of public policies wrong. The city has suffered enormous setbacks along the dimensions of public safety and livability. And I agree with much of what you said regarding sort of the county's future and that it is becoming increasingly problematic or worrisome, and that we might be following in the city's footsteps, which is not the footsteps we want to follow in. I'd rather follow in the footsteps of more prosperous communities, more fiscally sustainable communities that maintain their AAA bond rating. We just have to fight for good public policy in Baltimore County, but I'm not leaving.
Well, I don't want to leave, but I had to make the phone call, and I'm serious. I am thinking about leaving, and the reason people leave, it's three reasons. Quality of life is decreasing, okay, and this may sound like a small thing, but we recently had what happened in East Point with the kids getting out of control down there. They canceled that carnival. They canceled the carnival in White Marsh. Lansdowne used to have a carnival that they canceled for basically the same reasons. And carnival may not seem that big of a deal, but it's quality of life. People can take their family to events like that, and events like that are closing up. And another problem that Baltimore City has as far as quality of life, you've got rats coming into Baltimore County into places that never had a rat problem before. Trash is showing up where there was never any trash. Traffic is getting out of control, and I just found out over on Harford Road they're going to build, I think, another 180 houses. That I can't believe that nobody said, okay, well, how's this going to affect traffic congestion? It's going to destroy that part of Harford Road. 180 additional houses. So you got quality of life going down. If you look at Baltimore County, there's more people under the poverty line. There's an increasing number of vacant houses. Again, quality of life stuff. And then you've got crime going up in Baltimore County. And then taxes that are going up. So these are the reasons why people leave: quality of life, taxes, and crime. And of course, schools. And something that I'm hearing about in my personal life, but some of my friends are pulling their kids out of county schools because of bullying. And one thing, again, that I don't hear the politicians talking about, I think that as we move forward, more and more kids are going to be homeschooled. And I don't see any mention of that by any of the politicians. I don't know if it's in the Kerwin report, but I think that there's a chance that the old brick and mortar schools are to a certain extent going to go the way that the brick and mortar retail stores went. I think that education is going to become much more personal, much more online, and much more individually based. And I think there should be at least a conversation started about all that, because like I said, some people I know are pulling their kids out of Baltimore County schools to homeschool them because of what's going on with the bullying situation. Not good. So these are the reasons why people leave, and these sort of things need to be addressed. But I want to take this opportunity to thank you for coming in. And do you have any contact information you would like to provide to our viewers?
Well, we're at Sage Policy Group Incorporated, 410-522-7243. That's 410-522-SAGE, and we're in business to do business. We do economic research for all kinds of folks, clients in more than 40 states and in 7 countries. And so, we're making a go of it in downtown Baltimore as a business. My residence is in Baltimore County. I'm a proud member of both communities, and I'm not leaving. I'm fighting for both of them. And even though we are our own worst enemy in some sense, like I say, these communities have given me everything I've ever asked for, and so it is always time to give back. And so I hope to spend the back end of my career doing precisely that.
Well, sounds good. And to the viewers out there, thank you for tuning in. I think this was a very educational episode of Maryland Politics, and we will see you next time. You're watching Maryland Politics here on TV Free Baltimore.
Hey guys, Johnny Alonzo, and you're watching TV Free Baltimore.
You're watching The Paul Stefan Show on TV Free Baltimore.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of our program. Tonight, we're very proud to have with us actress Eliza Kelly. And here's a clip of some of her work.
My dear brother Sam has enlisted with the Confederates. He'll die for sure. How could he do this to me? There's a man. He talks to the dead. Perhaps I can employ him to reach Billy in heaven.
Get hold of yourself, man.
Get a hold of yourself, Abraham. Get a hold of this country.
Welcome, Eliza. Glad to have you here today.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, first, we just saw a clip of you as Mary Todd Lincoln, and you played a number of episodes as Mrs. Lincoln, and this was where, on Fox?
Yes, on Fox News.
Okay.
And yes, I believe I was in 6 episodes out of the 12 that aired, and the clip that you saw was from episode 2.
Okay. And what was Mary mad about?
The fact that her brother had just joined the Confederates, and she had already lost Willie by this point, and just was beside herself at the thought of losing her brother too. And unfortunately, she did. He did get killed in battle. So she'd had enough with Abraham Lincoln and his decision making. She wanted some changes.
There you go. And you were privileged enough to, like you said, play her 6 times. Were these all like short? I'm not familiar with these films. I mean, were they whole films, or were they just like 5-10 minute pieces, or what were they?
So each episode is about 45 minutes.
Oh, they're that long. Yeah. Wow. It's like a real episode.
Full episode. Well,
it's like a series.
It fits an hour. Yes, it is absolutely. It's a mini series. That's really what it is.
Cool.
And I was extremely happy when they finally aired, because we went through a time period where it was about a year, and it was supposed to air in 2017, and then things happened and it did not, and I wasn't sure if it was going to air. And that particular role, not only did I feel like it was important to my career, it was extremely important to me as a person, because I have been infatuated with the Lincolns since I was in middle school. So I was extremely privileged to play that part, and the amount of work that went into it, and knowing how magical it had been to be on set. I just couldn't imagine people not getting a chance to see it, and it wasn't just about me, it was about the work that everybody else had put into it, the people who made every stitch of my clothing, the people who did my hair and makeup for every show. I mean, I spent an hour getting ready every episode. So, just to know what went on behind the scenes, and and in front of the camera and behind the camera, and knowing that so many people had put so much time into it. So I was really, really happy to see that it was going to air, and it was a huge surprise, actually. Out of the blue, I got an email from the producer, and apparently there had been some trailers that had been going around, but I had not seen them myself. And so he said, I'm sure some of you have seen these trailers, and I literally screamed in my house. I was like, it's happening! So it was, and I think it was only a couple of days after that, or maybe it was within a week or so, that it actually aired. Terrific. So I didn't have to wait long after finding out it was going to air.
Did you get a lot of good feedback for your performance?
I did. It was the only clip that I really posted, or the two clips that I posted on Facebook, were the scene that you just watched, and then the seance.
The seance, yeah, I saw that one too.
Yeah, that one was fun as well.
I bet it was.
Yeah, just to get to be in that space. And that was really the only ones that I was able to grab, or that my real guys were able to grab at the time. And those were really the strongest of the bunch. There's plenty of good scenes throughout, but those were two that really showcased my skills.
I'd seen clip, though, of, the day of and the assassination, too.
Oh, yes. Yeah, those were some very emotional scenes to film.
Riding in the carriage out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah, that one was nice.
And then at Ford's Theater, or the replica of Ford's Theater. I'm sure they wouldn't let you film there, but
that's a fun story. As we were going up into the booth to film our scene, it was great because you hear paint still drying, watch your sides as we're walking up the stairs. I'm like, I love this. I love every bit of what's not ready, what is ready, the final push. It's wonderful to see teamwork going on like that.
Well, one question I was going to have for you later, but this is where I can jump in with this one because it's appropriate to what we're talking about, is how did you prepare for Mary Lincoln?
I get that question a lot, and I didn't have to. I don't know if it's because maybe I've been preparing since I was in middle school, or because I felt like I knew her so well. Part of it was that, because I had my own definition of who Mary Todd was already. My first question to the director, Kevin Hirschberger, was, how are we playing this? Because I know how I want to play it, but I need to know how you want me to play it.
Right, there you go.
And when he told me that we were not going with crazy, I said, thank you. So his vision already matched my vision, and it was wonderful to get to really explore those pieces. Being in there with Fritz Klein, who played Abe, he was Abe. So I didn't even feel like I had to pretend that I was in some different era or space and time. It just was. And the boys who played my sons, they were so wonderful. Wonderful family. They're real brothers in real life. So everything just fell into place so easily. The script really lent itself very well to all of her emotions that she was going through, the ups and downs. And there are some calm moments that I get to play.
Okay.
So that's nice. But yeah, it really was not difficult. It was just something I could feel.
Because it seemed like to me, you can play maybe more realistically as you did, or some people can do the caricature of Mary Todd.
Yeah.
She's this psycho woman.
Yes. And I did have a lot of people afterwards, especially after I posted those first two scenes, say, oh, you do crazy well.
Okay.
And I have to tell you, I had to defend her every single time. I couldn't just let it lie. It was like, she's not crazy. She's traumatized, So it's interesting to be a part of that conversation now.
Now, I think that, again, I'll bring that up, is that a lot of different actresses have played that part. And most recently, people say, Sally Field.
I know.
Playing in Lincoln.
Yes.
And I mean, do you think about that? You look at that? You just throw that away and say, I'm going to do my interpretation?
That's a great question. Kevin did want to direct me towards that. I think primarily regarding the accent, and nobody wanted me to portray Mary the way that anybody else had per se, but just to be able to kind of have a baseline, I guess, to make to see where I felt I fit in. And I did watch her pieces specifically, and at the time, and even still, I have an accent and dialect coach, and I had just started working with her when I landed this role.
Oh, you're lucky.
And yes, right. It was, I had, as part of my signing on with her, I had a 15-minute free consultation. And so I knew exactly what I was going to talk to her about. So I need to talk to you about this accent and how to make it work. So I would actually go and record Sally's version of the accent, and then I would talk to her, my accent coach, Eliza Jane Schneider, about the time period, where she had been born, how long she had been there. She spoke French, so that kind of played a part in decreasing the amount of plantation Southern that she would have been using at the time, and especially because they were in high society. So all of those pieces play a part in how you do an accent.
That's amazing considering it's a TV thing. You think it's rushed for time, low budget presumably, and it seemed like a lot of care was put into it, getting the official Abe, having you, having costumes and sets being as close to period as we can get on our budget, all of that. So I think that's great. It's about as close as you could get to doing Lincoln with Steven Spielberg. It's about as close as you could get.
Yes, absolutely. And even, you mentioned the costuming, and I literally watched Christy, who did a lot of my costumes, looking at the books for historical accuracy. My black outfit is almost an actual replica of what she was wearing, down to the little sleeves and everything. So I was very impressed with as you say, the care that went into it, the amount of time that they spent on me. Right. You really forge great relationships when you have that kind of time on set with people.
Because that was that costume when they have the photograph of you that makes it look like it's a tintype or an old photograph. You're standing there by the chair. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. That's, you do look 19th century there.
Yes.
And then, of course, we'll shift a little bit. And folks, we're going to have now a little clip also from the highlight reel of Eliza's performance in Bill Tillman and the Outlaws.
Age cannot wither her, nor custom stale her infinite variety.
All the time we've been together, I've never believed a word you've said. But I sure love hearing them.
Well, seems neither one of us could shed the other.
Seems so. Quit trying to make sense of it. I just show up and do your bidding and leave. Never knowing when I'll lay eyes on you again. Months. Years. Never.
And now what we just saw there, why don't you explain the scene that you were in Bill Tillman there?
So I am departing my beloved Cole Younger at that point in time, and it had been 17 years since I had seen him. I found out he was out. I came to the saloon, and I don't want to give away what I was doing and why I was leaving completely, because that is kind of it's an integral part of the story.
Right.
But yeah, it was really fascinating to get there. 30 minutes in, we're in that bedroom doing this passionate scene, and I had basically just met him.
Interesting.
Yes.
You'd met him just the same day or something?
Just within that 30 minutes.
In that 30 minutes, you said, "Oh, here's Darby, and let's do this scene."
Yes.
Now that's what they call acting, right?
Exactly. Actually, Dan Searles, the writer, he said, "How did you make it look like you've known each other for 30 years and not 30 minutes.
Right.
I said, well, when you have, and Darby, I mean, he's been doing this, he basically was born in Hollywood.
Of course. Yeah.
So I knew right off the bat that I could just trust him.
All right. You'd have a good scene partner.
Absolutely. And when he came into, I was still getting ready in hair and makeup. He came in, introduced himself, and basically went right into the scene.
Wow.
And so we were in there rehearsing, and it was so incredible to be able to do that and to really be able to settle in pretty quickly within, I think, probably 15 minutes maybe. And then we went right over. Wayne gave us some direction that some of the best direction I've ever received, because it was not, here, do it like this, or go here, do this. It was general blocking, and he really allowed us as actors to play within our space as our characters. But what he did do was he gave us some key words about feeling and memory and relationships. And I felt like that just laid the groundwork for where we needed to go. And then we did, with the original blocking, we did one rehearsal. He chose to tell Darby to not let me, or he said, Eliza, don't turn around. Just let Darby come in, and Darby, you basically, it became his scene at that moment in terms of, but it was amazing when we did that, just that. We just completely fell into those two people.
Terrific.
Yeah, it was great.
And Wayne Shipley is a friend of ours, and I had that privilege of interviewing him in the sheriff's office.
Oh!
And you could see that on our channel.
Okay.
And of course, the bedroom was only really across the way
That's
from
right.
where the sheriff's office was, and the
studio
jail cell,
bedroom.
and the jail cell.
Yes.
The hotel bedroom.
Yeah.
Right, all in the magic of make-believe there.
Yes.
Now, you've also been a very busy actress, haven't you, recently?
Yes.
Since Bill Tillman, even.
Yes.
Or during Bill Tillman.
Yes.
And I mean, we can briefly go through these because I definitely want to get into some of my other questions. It's supposed to be some movies that are in post-production. One called, what is it, The Scion?
That one is actually down in Georgia, and I have not filmed on that one yet.
You haven't filmed?
No.
Because it says post-production.
Yes.
That usually means filming's done.
Right. So I don't know exactly what happened with
We'll go past that
one.
then.
Yeah.
How about Indomitable?
Indomitable is, I think she's looking for distribution on that one.
Okay.
And I have to give a shout out.
Okay.
Because
please.
I did not know when I got on set that it was a SAG production.
Uh-oh. Okay.
I had never done SAG work, and therefore was not yet eligible. And of course, I had moved too far into my career to try and do a bunch of background work in order to get the SAG card. I knew for me that there would be a better way. So I was actually in Georgia on vacation at the time, but my family lives down there still, and the school that I work for is there. So it's my family school. A friend of mine, Albert Roberts, he posted something about Tess Wilmot looking for some space to use that could be like an open office space, open counselor type room. And I said, well, it's Christmas break. So I have plenty of access to this location. Our school has plenty of spaces that you could use.
Right.
So she contacted me, and she didn't know I was an actress. She just thought I was location scouting for her or offering up a location.
Okay.
So suddenly we're talking, and she says something about she's had to replace the woman who played the counselor, but she's 38 weeks pregnant.
Oh, okay.
And so Albert actually says to her, well, Eliza could do that role. And she says, you're an actress? I was like, oh, yes, that's what I do. So I think it was either that day or the day before, she sends me the script. And I get to go and do this, and I actually brought former students of mine on because it was it's military based and about PTSD.
Okay.
And I had a couple of students who had gone into the military, and they actually really identified with this, and they had also been in my drama classes when I was a teacher.
Okay.
So that was really amazing to get to act in a film with my former students. And when we got on set, she hands us paperwork and it says SAG. And I looked at it and I said, "This is a SAG production?" So she gave me my SAG eligibility, and just with one shoot because I had a speaking role.
So you were able to get a SAG card then?
I'm still working on that, timing-wise. I am actually a must-join now after House of Cards. So.
Well, but Bill Tillman was a SAG production.
Yes, but it was... I don't know. They were the ones that alerted SAG, I think, because they had to check on me.
Oh, on you?
Yeah.
Okay.
But I think my role did not, I don't know, that wasn't my...
Well, you
Either way,
replaced Connie Lamothe in that role.
Yes.
Because she had illness.
Right. Which I did not know at the time.
Right.
But I've actually known her since I started my career.
So you know her anyway.
Yes.
That's good.
Yeah. So when I've actually I've thanked her multiple times. I said I know that might be a weird thing, but I'm so grateful that this opened up for me. And
well, that's good. Now maybe she can use you because she's a director too.
Right.
So it all works out, right?
It all works out. Yeah.
So that was an amazing thing, and then there was one called Deja.
Yes.
What is Deja, and what is your role in that?
Did you watch that? Did you get a chance to see that?
I don't think I saw that one.
I'll have to send that one to you.
And that's not the one I'm thinking of, is it? Because I'm thinking of one where there's a woman in a hotel room or something and her ex-lover or something.
Oh, that's my one woman piece.
That's different.
That's different.
What's Deja then?
Deja is, again, Albert Roberts in Georgia.
Oh, okay.
He is a filmmaker as well, and we had wanted to collaborate, and we decided to do everything on a phone. And we shot the two of us going back and forth, and it was just in one weekend. We had this little...
Wow. Is it a short?
It's very short.
Okay, it's a short.
Yes.
Okay. All right. And this is another one that's called Battletech Mercenaries?
Yes. That one is,
what's
again,
that
out of Georgia.
Yeah, okay.
With Bravo Whiskey Charlie
Okay.
films. And...
what's that one, and what's your role there?
I played a commander.
Oh.
Yes.
Military commander.
Yes.
Oh, there she goes.
And that one is based on a video game, actually.
Okay. Interesting.
Yes, which is interesting because I actually don't play video games. So, but that was not, I suppose, important at the time.
Right. To play a commander.
So he's trying. That is another one that is looking into distribution.
Okay. And of course, then there was one I think you may have just finished, Hurricane Roads.
Hurricane Roads was a student film based out of Old Dominion. And the hurricane is the backdrop for several different types of relationships that, when you're preparing for a disaster and tensions are high, how you relate to each other.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Some relationships are strengthened and some are not.
Huh? And then there's a short called Rising to Power.
Yes, Rising to Power has become a series.
A series now.
Yes.
Yeah.
And
what was your role in that, or is your role in that?
I was the older woman.
It's horrible to say,
I
just
know
the older woman. Not the other woman, but the older woman.
Just the older woman. The
older than what? I mean, the teenagers?
I know. It's follows three friends who have grown up together, and their different ways of looking at life and their different ways of gaining power.
Oh.
And the character that I'm involved with is not a nice guy.
Ooh.
No, he takes advantage of everyone. And so it breaks the fourth wall a lot as well, which is interesting. So some of the monologues that they have that are straight to the camera are very, they dig deep. And
wow.
So I was his bar pickup, basically.
Okay.
So we'll see if I come back in a different episode or not.
Now, is this a series they're pitching somewhere, or where could people see it, do you think?
I believe he's going to have it as a web series.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Well, good. Maybe they will write you in some more.
Yeah, I hope so. He has a lot of films that he's.
Well, or you
be
can use it in
creating.
something else. And, of course, then the last one was Elijah and George. What is that all about?
Elijah and George is currently in pre-production, and it is about the camp followers during the Revolutionary War.
Wow, that's right up your alley.
Yes, it is. Exactly. I kind of lived that this past weekend.
Right.
But it is about, I don't know how much I can give away.
Then don't.
Right. My role is, so I play the mother of Elijah.
Okay.
And I will say that my role and what happens to me is pivotal in many of the decisions that get made within the family.
Oh, I gotcha.
Yes. And Elijah and his dad,
Okay.
well, his dad joins the army, and Elijah ends up becoming a camp follower
Oh.
with some of the neighbors that he knows.
Interesting.
And so it's about those
Okay.
people who lived that kind of a life.
I thought maybe George was George Washington, but
It is.
it is. It's Elijah and George Washington.
Yes, it is Elijah and George Washington, yes.
Oh, interesting.
Yes.
We will have to see
and the
that.
gentleman that played John Koopman, the gentleman who is going to be George Washington, he's actually out of Connecticut, I believe.
Oh, yeah?
And he portrays George Washington.
Oh, okay.
And actually, there are some new humongous paintings that have been done of him
Wow.
on his horse, and to see the horsemanship that he has is just incredible.
Amazing.
Yes. So that's very exciting.
Amazing
to be
for
part of
somebody
that.
like you who likes history, who worked with somebody who's a definitive George and somebody's a definitive Abe.
Yes.
Even though I liked, it was Jeff Daniels, not Jeff Daniels, but it was another actor who played George Washington in Turn Washington Spies. That guy was incredible, I thought.
Yes.
Because they had George with still the copperish hair, not the powdered wig. And I thought this guy was real. He was like, you saw a real person and not an icon in that performance.
I actually auditioned for Martha Washington
You
for
did?
Turn, and I
Didn't get it.
I didn't get it, of course, but yes, I loved him as George Washington.
That guy was great.
But like the Lincolns, I love the Washington history.
Well, you still got to be one of those famous ladies anyway.
I did, sort of.
Now, of course, you started very young, and it was stage acting first, right?
Well, my commercial when I was
And then it was stage acting.
Yes, and then it was stage acting.
And then TV and film.
Mm-hmm.
Now, they're different types of media, obviously.
Absolutely.
And what have you feel as an actress you've learned from stage as opposed to film and TV, or even what you learned from all of them?
Right. So stage.
Mm-hmm.
I think that maybe my ability to fall into the character as I do probably comes from the stage work. Because in theater, you have to maintain that character for a length of time. You have to really drop yourself into it fully. And I think that has helped me in film to be able to do that easily.
Like, for example, with Darby, to get into the scene that quick.
Right.
To get into that person
and to
that you're
trust
playing.
Right, to trust people, to trust actors as people, and to really be able to let it happen.
Oh, well, there you go. That's something. Because you had other stuff in there. I mean, you were trained in opera.
Oh, I was not trained in opera.
I thought it said opera on your resume or IMDb. It said.
Oh, it better not.
Well, then we'll get that changed.
I'll have to look that up.
I think that's what it said. And when I, it's sort of like correct those things. When I interviewed Dawn Wells, I went through things and she told me things that weren't true about her.
Goodness. I'm gonna have to really. I don't know who would have put that in there.
That you sang, because I thought I even wrote something to you that because it said German literature and opera, and that you also were supposed to be a black belt in Taekwondo.
Yes.
Now
I am a black belt in Taekwondo.
That's accurate. Don't mess with this woman. Okay?
I can sing, but I am not a singer.
Okay, you can sing, but you're not a singer.
Although I was a singing wench at a medieval tavern.
Okay. Now, what are the type of roles that you would like to play? Or you have dream roles, maybe, that you'd like to play?
I really enjoy the fantasy world. So, and fantasy can be, it's not necessarily always the fairy world and things like that, but even shows like Supernatural or, and there is an element, I believe, to even the apocalyptic shows that is fantasy, only because I believe that when you talk about fantasy as a genre, you have the ability to be a bigger persona. The stakes are higher in those shows.
Right.
And that's something that speaks to me on multiple levels. The ability to really put my emotions out there on that level. That doesn't mean that I have to be big and boisterous or whatever, but that push. And then period pieces, of course. Of course. I knew that I always wanted to be part of the period pieces, but then when I got my first role for Legends and Lies Season 2 as Deborah Franklin, that solidified it thoroughly. And then to be able to play Mary Todd Lincoln, and then to be able to even just to do the Bill Tillman, being on that set with all that. And that's early 1900s, but that's still period. There's still
it is period,
an element of that.
Over 100 years ago, and they're kind of like saying they're the last, it's the Old West is going out.
Yes.
Kind of thing, but it's still there.
Yeah.
In Oklahoma.
Right. So those are my preferred roles.
Because I have a quote of something, that question I think was asked of you, and you said, "You're best at playing strong, passionate women with powerful, consuming desires."
Yes.
That's quite a quote.
Thank you.
That's smoldering kind of words there. And then, okay, let's see. Now, you've done comedy, too.
A little bit.
Yeah. Do you like that? Or do you prefer comedy or drama? Or?
I am assuming, are you referring to District of Comedia?
That one, yes, where you're the girl behind the counter, yeah.
Yes, I really enjoy that kind of comedy because the comedy is really in the wordplay.
Right.
I don't like slapstick comedy.
Okay.
I don't necessarily enjoy that physical, silly aspect of
so sophisticated comedy,
sophisticated
kind of stuff you would
comedy.
have saw in the 30s and 40s, and the interplay, the verbal interplay between the male and female characters,
Yes.
that kind of thing.
Which ironically leads back to the period pieces.
Again, that's period, right? You're right. It was a delight to have you here.
Thank you.
And we always
again.
tell people, don't be strangers. If things are coming up, we want you to come back and
I will
talk
let you
about
know.
them, or
Yes.
or we'll interview the kids, or I don't know,
Yeah.
or something. We'll have the Kelly clan in here.
That's right. It'll be a little bit of chaotic.
Who knows?
But
That could be fun.
That's all right.
It could be fun. All right. Well, it was a delight.
Thank you so much.
And one other thing. Tell people your contact information.
You can reach me at actresseliza@gmail.com, and also on Instagram at actresseliza, Twitter at actresseliza, Facebook Eliza Kelly, Kelley.
Okay. Very good. There we go again. So again, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, that's the end of another one of our programs. And again, it was a delight. And please try to find films wherever you can find them that have in the cast Eliza Kelly with an EY. And you won't be disappointed. And we hope to hear some more great things out of this woman. And maybe one day, at the Oscars, who knows. But until the next time, I'm Paul Stefan, and good evening.
You're watching The Paul Stefan Show on TV Free Baltimore.
Hey there, folks. This is Lenny Rudo from Fish Talk Magazine, and you're watching TV Free Baltimore.
This is Sam with Restore Computer Repair in Baltimore, Maryland. If you're having any computer problems whatsoever with your Mac or PC, desktop or laptop, we can fix it at a guaranteed lowest price. We're located at 8701 Harford Road in Parkville, Maryland, 21234. You can reach us at 443-725-5050. That's 443-725-5050. We're open Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. to 5:30 p.m., and Saturdays, 10 a.m. to 2 p.m. You can reach us at www.restorecomputerrepair.com.
Welcome to TV Free Baltimore's Books and Authors.
Hello, Paul Stefan here, and welcome to another edition of TV Free Baltimore's Books and Authors. Today, we have a very interesting storyteller here. As I say here at our station, we say that everybody has a story and we're here to tell it. This is a gentleman who is a published poet, but also works as a Baltimore City police officer. And I'm talking about Edward Doyle Gillespie. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Now, what I want to be able to ask first is looking at your background, which is impressive academically. George Washington, history. Right. And then you go to Johns Hopkins for MLA.
Right.
Which is what exactly?
Master of Liberal Arts.
Master of Liberal Arts, okay. And first of all, what was that transition from history to liberal arts coming? Why did you get then a master's in history?
Well, it's funny. I got my degree in history and I became a teacher.
Right.
I taught in Baltimore City Public Schools for a little while. I did museum curation. Mm-hmm. I taught social studies, history, English. I taught at Baltimore Friends. Mm-hmm. And then I started doing curriculum writing for a foundation, a Johns Hopkins Foundation, the Success for All Foundation. Mm-hmm. So I had already immersed myself. I kind of took history and broadened it into how do I interweave it with philosophy and literature and sociology and things like that. And so the Master of Liberal Arts seemed like a natural progression. Coming to understand myself as a liberal arts person and a humanities person. Mm-hmm. And it was great. It was a great move that seeing how things are interconnected. It was the way I always thought. Like when I taught history, I used a lot of literature, I used a lot of philosophy, I used music, which was great. I used science, and so that was a fun. I missed the program. I had a great time.
I bet you did.
Yes.
Now, the interesting thing, then there comes a time where there is this, career change that, first of all, at a later age than most guys go into the police academy.
Right.
You were about 35.
I was 35.
And why did you go from a career in academia to a career in public safety?
I had tried to be a U.S. Marine Corps officer when I was in undergrad, and I injured my back. Wasn't able to do that. I always wanted to work in public defense and public safety and that type of thing, and be in that type sort of an organization. And 9/11 really was the pivotal thing for me. That was supposed to be my first day of grad school. So I resolved to get my master's degree, earn a black belt, then go and be a public guardian. And so that's what I did. I was in the first academy class in 2005. I was in 0501.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now, why Baltimore City?
That people ask me. That's where I lived.
Oh, you were living in Baltimore City at the time?
Yes.
Not Philly?
No. I had just been teaching in Baltimore Friends. I was working in Towson, about to go to Hopkins. I was in Baltimore City, and I wanted to start my career in law enforcement right where I was.
Knowing, even then, how rough the city can be and how the police force can be, to say that you say, okay, I'm going to pick this jurisdiction.
Right. Yes.
And was it for you, at the beginning, we'll say, was it a tough transition or adjustment? Because it's unusual to see a lot of people who's going to all start out on the street to be a beat cop, to have all the education you had, which I think was probably a lot more than many patrolmen, and the fact that you were maybe at least 10 or more years older than the average patrolman.
Right.
And I don't know that they knew at the time, but because, I'm going to not maybe hang myself here, we can bleep it if we have to, but in a police force, there are people who are a little less forward thinking, the people who would know, and by the way, he's in a mixed marriage.
Sure.
To say, were any of these things difficult for you? Did you meet any
hurdles
or
all of those things?
Obstacles.
All of those things were a part of it. Got a lot of, why are you here? Are you here to write a book? And actually, from what I understand, it was years later. I was talking to a woman who'd been one of my instructors, and she said, everyone on staff thought you were there just to gather information to write a book for like a thesis for Hopkins or something, and we were kind of surprised that you stayed on. And but all of those things were part of the adventure. They really were. I mean, the education piece was kind of part and parcel of a whole cultural difference. I mean, I grew up in an upper middle class, rather basically suburban area. I had a PhD for a father. I went to a private school for 13 years. I traveled all over the place, and now I was working in Sandtown, Winchester. So I was working with people whose life experiences were vastly different than mine, and the culture that produced those life experiences was not something organic to me. I teach a lot about implicit bias. I teach a lot about the origins of bias and how it influences us. And in retrospect, I can definitely say that when I worked in Bolton Hill, when I worked in Seton Hill, when I worked in places that were middle class or upper class and were more reflective of what I'd grown up with, I deported myself differently. I spoke differently. I had a different comfort level. And so a big part of policing was learning different cultures, learning myself, learning my biases, and learning my strengths and my weaknesses by being kind of this fish out of water. And then how I began to adapt to it in my way.
I was going to say, you said it started in Sandtown, Winchester, so wasn't it not just for them with you, but for you with them, a culture shock?
Oh, completely. Oh, it was a total culture shock, yeah. I mean, whether it was, I couldn't understand sometimes the vernacular that people used. I also had to recognize, I don't know what it's like to have food anxiety. I don't know what it's like to have, to grow up in a neighborhood in which it's internationally known for violence. I'm not, or to have a low level of education, to have to fill out, to have to sign a police document and not be able to read it. And this is something, it called on, as much as this job has called on strength for me, as much as it's called on a propensity for strength and for an ability to deport myself with a type of elan and a type of fortitude, it's also called for empathy. It's called for a lot of empathy. It's called for a lot of humanism. To understand that I won a lottery. That any one of us, we won a lottery. I could have been born to a family in Sandtown, Winchester, and had malnutrition and lived in a food desert and all the things that I didn't have to experience. So I've grown in so many ways.
Because I would think hard, because again my background's in psychology and social work, that for the people in those communities, initially they're not going to know you, but if they got to know you or tried to, a lot of them try to get on your side and say, "Hey man, you're one of us,"
It was funny.
And culturally,
sure.
but you're not.
See, that's the thing. It's we tend to conflate race and culture in our society, don't we?
Yes.
Because we tend to kind of go for the easy sell. It's like, well, okay, this very binary. You're this race, you've got these characteristics and these qualities, and let alone trying to distinguish what ethnicity is, and But one thing I found was quite a few people that I encountered there went through a kind of cognitive dissonance. Because they said, well, you look like us, but you certainly don't deport yourself like us. This doesn't make sense. You're an immigrant. And so...
Everyone said, oh, you must be African, Caribbean.
Absolutely.
Yes.
And it was, constant thing. I had supervisors, people come to them and say, that African officer was up here and he gave me a ticket for nothing. And the supervisor's still African officer. And he's like going through his head as to who the officers on the shift are. And he's like... well, he's from Africa, but he's not up here, and they were like, who? That Gillespie. Like, he's not African, and but for many people there, quite a few, to the point that I would encounter people like, oh, I heard about you, you're the African officer. And it's funny because in at least one more circumstances, I'm sure than that, I played along and I just said, because if it broke down the cognitive dissonance and I could get to, it's like I'm trying to get information from someone, and this woman just kept saying, remember this one woman, and she just kept saying, where are you from? Where are you from? Why do you talk that way? And I finally said, I'm Canadian. And she said, oh, okay. And then she gave me all the information. Things were now clear and neat in her head.
Well, to me, for example, what's sad is, to me, on the people you're talking to, the people in the communities, from their perspective, it's almost like they're saying, an African-American person from the city can't be educated, can't be articulate,
Right.
They're supposed to be like us, and I've had this with other people, that sense of inbred kind of despair.
Right, right. And it's, people create whatever sphere they have to feel safe.
Mm-hmm.
They create their spheres, I call them terrariums in many cases, even if what I'm creating isn't logical, if it keeps me safe, like keeps my ego safe particularly. We're not talking, you could go up and down Maslow's hierarchy as to where this fits in, but if I feel qualified with what I'm doing,
right,
then great. And I encountered that with, and it's funny because the police force is so diverse.
Right.
It's so very diverse that, I've encountered officers who were equally well educated, and we've had great conversations. Right. And I've encountered officers who said, wow, what can I learn from you? Because I've been very open. I'm like, look, I've got a lot to learn from you guys.
Right.
I don't know how to work the streets. You handle weapons more than I do, so let me learn from you. I learned a lot from, and that's the thing about intelligence. I learned a lot from these guys. There are lots of different types of intelligence.
Right.
And then I did encounter officers who said, you have no place here. I said, well, these were the requirements that I passed them. Well, but this isn't a job for people like you. Why are you like this? Why are you here? And I had one guy say to me, guys like you are ruining this job. But it's not you have a broad variety of officers with a broad variety of experiences. And one thing I did was I kept my writing kind of separate. I wasn't really very open about the fact that I was writing. And I used it as a kind of release. Also, it was a cathartic thing I would do outside of work. And so I didn't find myself writing about policing for a long time.
Well, I was going to say, how long were you actually on the street?
I have done a total of 3 years of patrol, going call to call. I was for I think about 3 years in a unit called the Pennsylvania Avenue Task Force, which did special work up and down Pennsylvania Avenue. I've worked larceny from auto. So those were all outside, I did intelligence work, and I was in written directives also, so I was in, out. But I spent a good 6 years on the street, 7 years on the street, yeah.
Right. And I was going to say, part of it is, when then did you go to the academy? When were you appointed to the academy?
It's been about 5 years now.
5 years?
I think, yeah.
So that maybe the police force at some point said, well, we're going to use this guy's education to our benefit.
Yeah, I had to put in for it a few times. I love it. I'm really very happy with it.
So I think you said in a little way, I was going to ask what you learned from policing, from the street. And one of the things I read about you, it said something about you were impacted by going to, I think, your first murder. And that was a story.
Yeah, it was, we were sitting, it's funny, we were sitting and talking with the cars, kind of, one of those police rituals where you park the car so you can talk to the other guy.
Right.
And a call came out for a cutting. We got there, and this young man had been stabbed. And I remember him, I was running towards where he was lying cruciform in the street, and I remember him kind of turning his head and looking up at me, and I saw him
take his final breath?
Yeah, take his final breath. And, you download things, everything you encounter in policing, you kind of collect it. And then you keep those stories with you, and then you, depending upon what type of processor you are, you process that story. Ursula Le Guin, the science fiction writer, talks about the carry bag concept of civilization. She says, she felt that the first tool was not a stabbing device or a lever, but she felt it was probably a bag of some sort. And then she uses that as a metaphor for stories and at the same time, I think of that. I think of the old tradition from the British Isles of the sin eater. If you call that, the person who goes that someone's dying and well, gosh, what if we could collect their sins in a soul cake, and the sin eater comes along and collects all this negativity. And so it was like I could literally feel this kind of download into me. And so that I definitely did some writing about that moment.
I was going to say, was that murder that you witnessed, you just described, Was that the subject of your poem, The Final Hajj?
It was, yes.
It was.
Yes, that was the one.
Because it really does describe that whole experience, I do believe, in quite a way. And now, at the Academy, and I read an article about that and your work there from the Atlantic. And what is it what are the topics, the subjects that you teach there?
Okay, well, I teach counterterrorism. I teach CBRN, which is chemical, biological, radiological, and nuclear survival.
Okay.
That was getting prepared for that was wild. We went to Anniston, Alabama, and went through rooms of nerve gas. That was
okay.
I also teach ethics, community policing, procedural justice. I teach a leadership. Well, I teach some things under a leadership umbrella, and so I was kind of given carte blanche as to how I wanted to do some of this.
I was going to say, you using, let's say, literature and the humanities to describe some of these things or to create your lessons is a novel idea.
Right.
And did the higher people that are at the top, the people that the higher powers in the academy say, what? I don't know if we've never seen it. I don't know, they gave you permission to do that.
Sure. I went to my first supervisor, and I said, I'd like to do an ethics class, and I want to use Plato's idea of the tripartite soul. I'm just going to distill that from the Republic and talk about the idea of the golden mean of the mind, or it would have been ultimately Plato talking about the prefrontal cortex, how it has to work with the fighting spirit to control the appetites. So the prefrontal cortex having some sort of control over the amygdala, and how we make decisions, and how we make ethical decisions, and what happens when officers don't allow that logical thought and that projected thought to. And he said, what are you talking about? And so I said, well, let me show you. And so one thing I have to do, of course, is say, okay. So I showed him, and he said, well, okay, run with it and see what you can do with it. And to be able to say, okay, first of all, to acknowledge my audience and say, look, guys, I know this seems weird, but I think there's something for us to know here. Because think about it, we're police officers. The Western world means a lot. The development of Western thought. It's a big deal when you put on that badge. There's a reason why we're expected to do what we do, why we've raised the questions that we have, right? So I said, just roll with me here. We're going to come back to Baltimore. First, we're going to ancient Greece. We're going to talk about this, right? So we put that together. I let them play with it for a while. Then I say, and so I made sure to acknowledge it. Some of them are kind of rolling their eyes and saying, what the heck is this guy doing?
Right.
And so I made sure to put up a slide that had the most, hard-bitten cops from popular culture on it, kind of ground. What does this have to do with being a cop? Right. So then I went to cases of police corruption from around the country. And I said, no, let's read this. I gave them the cases. I said, read this. Now, what would Plato say was this cop's problem? What was the issue here? And they kept coming back to, you're not using your rational brain. You're letting your amygdala take over here. Your desire for greed, your greed, your desire for sex, your desire for, whatever, to override what an officer should be doing. And so based on that, the main thing has been, this is what some of the great thinkers of the Western world have said about authority, have said about public service. Is this reflected in what we do? I've been making a lot of work of James Baldwin lately, which has been neat.
Okay. Do you feel that, in the years you've done it for a while now, and I understand you only have like 2 weeks with these people a year?
Yes. It's been a week long, it's been 2 weeks long. But yes,
but I'm just saying, that's not a lot of time, and a lot of these people, like you say, are maybe not past the 12th grade in education. Do you feel that the amount of time that you have and the people you're working with, do you make an impact? And what kind of impact do you think you've made?
I feel it's been good. And don't forget, of those 2 weeks, I have very small. I might have 2 hours here, an hour there.
Okay.
So I distill what they need. If I can get down to, here is this writer, here's one of his big ideas. And let's get back to it. And I'll mix that in with popular culture. I'll mix that in with, stuff they've been through. A big part of teaching adults, of course, is having this, saying to them, what have you seen? How has this been reflected on what you've seen? You know, I'm doing something using Kant now. Okay, so I talk about deontology. Deontology and teleology. Well, what does that mean? Well, okay, well, deontology is I have to do the right thing right now, even if what comes out of it is wrong. So the right thing right now is I have to let you go. I had you stopped. There's nothing more to be done. Goodbye. I don't know what you're going to go off and do. You might be a bad guy, but right now, you're an innocent.
Right.
Teleology is that corrupt cop who says, I will do anything to get you. So I have to talk, and, you know, they're pretty sharp. Maybe, you know, some of them have phenomenal vocabularies and are very well educated. Lots of them, you know, it's such a diverse group. They get by, you know, the way they can, but they're pretty sharp. And I mean, when I present it in certain ways, they usually link in. And I said, you know, one thing I love to bring up with them is Kant said, you know, that which would be your maxim, let it be universal law. You know, I try to bring that up at least once in class, because the big deal is if you think the police should behave this way now, make sure you want to live in a world in which the police behave this way all the time. They'll treat your son this way. They'll treat your mom this way, right? And you know, I see a lot of nodding heads in class. You know, even the the ones that are cynical, just a bunch of they get it. You know, and you know, I've learned a lot. You know, I've learned that maybe a person who would never set foot in Johns Hopkins University is still a pretty acute person. Is pretty sharp. You know, maybe he'll have his way of saying it or her way of articulating it, but they can keep me on my toes. They're actually some pretty smart. You know, it's funny. I work with academics and I work with cops, and I've seen different types of intelligence, and I've seen different. You know, I worked with people at Johns Hopkins who had multiple degrees, and I work with cops who have GEDs. But as I talk to them and listen to them, I learn intelligence comes in different flavors and it comes in different styles. And
have you had then, after they've done your class and maybe years later, have you had people give you any positive feedback?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah. I've had people come back to me and say, you know, I thought about your class the other day because I was in this situation. I've had people come to me after class and say, hey, you know, I had this thing happen to me, and, you know, what do you think of this? And so, yeah, and even I do a class on sovereign citizen extremists, if you're familiar with that, but they're extremists that refuse to acknowledge the U.S. government, and they have a whole kind of delusional mindset, but they're all over the country, they're all over the world. And I actually had an officer say to me, I was able to diffuse a situation with one of these people because of what I learned in one of your classes.
There you go.
Yeah, so that's
good.
It's very gratifying.
It's good. And I was going to say then, to transition more, because it's interesting that you are a policeman that's a poet. And you say, do you keep that kind of down low with your colleagues or not?
Not as much as I used to. I kind of bifurcated my life for a while, but no, I've let it out more and more, and I have, you know, I've had people that on the department buy my book, and you know, and I think I kind of laid some fertile soil. I think I kind of earned that it was like, well, he's kind of weird anyway. He's into this, you know.
So it's okay that he's a poet.
Yeah, and we have had a few cops that were writers. You know, often it was prose and you know, fiction, and I have some of that coming along too. I've got a science fiction piece. I have a few science fiction pieces going actually.
Great.
And I've got a few novels in the offing.
Hear a little bit about that towards the end, I hope.
Sure.
Now, the one question would be, because to make that transition, is how has policing affected your poetry?
Oh my gosh, it's had a powerful effect on it. It really has.
So it's like there are the impact and after the impact of policing.
When they're doing the scholarship on me, you know, going from
they'll know the early period.
The early period work, and then this is once he transferred to policing. Yes.
Yes.
There's a greater sense of place. There's a greater sense of place with work now, and place being the space where something is the space that is now given meaning because of human action. Baltimore is a wildly unique character. I just finished reading a book that, well, it's funny, I'm reading Giovanni's Room, and I just finished Confederacy of Dunces. Giovanni's Room takes place in Paris, Confederacy of Dunces in New Orleans.
Right.
And in both cases, the city itself is a type of character. It's like, this character would not be doing these things and behaving this way and saying what she's saying or doing what he's doing were they not in this particular place at this particular time. And Baltimore is very much like that, which is just one thing that I find. I've found Baltimore more and more fascinating since becoming a
place really has become maybe a character or presence,
Absolutely.
we'll say, in your poems.
Baltimore as a place is speech. It's conflict. The unique conflicts of Baltimore. It smells. And why does this smell exist in this place? Why does this image exist in this place? And it's funny because policing will provide these great, powerful metaphors that that you'll see, and I carry them home with me. I remember one evening going home and having to throw away my sweater. I had to get rid of it. And head home because it was so saturated with blood. And I left where I worked and went back to where I live, which is a different part of Baltimore, and getting the stain off of me before I went into this other Baltimore was like really pivotal. Like I had to get get
it off.
Get it off, right. But yeah, it's I'm fascinated. I continue to be fascinated by the city.
Now, with your poetry, who have been your influences? They may not have all been poets, but who are your influences, or who are some of your favorites who inspired you?
I was thinking about that. Ginsberg is one.
Allen Ginsberg.
Allen Ginsberg. I actually got to meet him.
You did? Before he died?
Yeah, before he died. I think I was like 25, maybe.
How?
I met him, this was when I was younger than 25. This was when I first lived in Baltimore. We came to Baltimore for 3 years right out of college, and I met him at MICA.
Oh, okay.
He was giving a reading at MICA. I carried his stool and his box of poems. I carried his stool, my wife carried his box of poems. And I sat down next to him for a bit. He goes, "Where are you from, kid?" And we talked a little bit. And I love how direct and raw and angry his poetry is. Along those same lines, I love Anne Sexton and Sylvia Plath, two of my favorites. Those two, once again, spoke very directly and very, very unapologetically, and were so much a part of feminism, and said it very clearly. Broadening just to writers in general, like I said, Baldwin, James Baldwin,
sure.
His work is powerful. James Baldwin, Ernest Hemingway, Steinbeck.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah. Joseph Conrad.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
And,
Heart of Darkness.
Yes, Heart of Darkness. I think I have reread Heart of Darkness like 3 times since I've been a police officer.
Wow.
That
book gets to you, huh?
I keep going back. Heart of Darkness, my mom used to teach Heart of Darkness. And I've been back to Heart of Darkness. And I read, not The Road, Cormac McCarthy, I think I'm drawing a blank, but...
It's okay.
Okay, but I kind of sat back at one point and said, what do I see in terms of the writers that really inspire me? And they are just very direct. There's a certain, I like how powerful, using direct, powerful language speaks to me.
Yeah, because I think something you may have quoted you saying is that you like the rawness and the exhilaration of what it means to be bare.
Right. When you have those moments, I really have found that I'm even if it's a very painful thing, there's something very genuine and unique. When you are in pain or someone else is in pain or happy or whatever, just people being very candid about their emotions. And doing police work, you see people stripped bare constantly. You see them, you see their pretenses and their affect kind of stripped away. Milan Kundera talks about
the unbearable lightness of being.
Yes, and in that book, he talks about every culture having its kitsch You know, and it's the expletive that he used for excrement. But I mean, and you know, seeing people get away from their personal kitsch.
Yeah.
You know, is.
But I would think you might also be affected. But the person I was affected by was William Faulkner.
Yes.
And one of his books, and I'm from high school, and it never left me after all these years, called Light in August. And it's about this guy, African American, whose name is Christmas, and his last name is Christmas, and all the stuff that he goes through, and of course all his poor white farmers and all of that, and it's kind of, you know, despairing but also life affirming, but kind of prose.
That's great. It's on my shelf. I'll read that now.
Is there Light in August?
It is on my shelf.
Now, for example, where do your ideas come from?
They just come. I mean, I get them. I kind of absorb them as I'm moving around, and also we listen to music and read, but there are these distilled images, and it's funny because people will kind of. It's almost like someone throwing something out, not really recognizing. Do you realize what you just threw out? That thing you just said, that image you just. Do you realize how powerful that image is? Like what? You know, and I'm sure I do it for people too. That you know, I've said very casually about some aspect of my life or whatever, and someone will go, "Oh my gosh," you know. Right?
Now, what would you say if somebody asked what your topics and what your themes are?
I really like the idea of identity, how people define themselves. How people struggle to define themselves. I think that's huge. I think conflict, how people handle conflict, how people absorb conflict. I'm always fascinated by the person who defines themselves in terms of conflict. That what happens when this conflict is gone? What happens when I finally win? If this has been so much a part of my life, whatever that happens to be.
For some people, it's all about the struggle.
Exactly. Exactly.
Now, it was said by somebody that the themes of your poetry are sex, violence, and myth.
My buddy, that's my oldest friend, Sean.
Okay.
Yeah, he said, I've been reading your work because I sent it to him to edit, and he looks at it, he says, you kind of live in the amygdala a lot of the time. Yeah. Not just sex, sexuality, sensuality, who we are at that moment, who we are in that distilled moment of violence. I mean, there's the fetishized moment of violence and the pornographic moment of violence or the pornographic moment of sex. It's like, but what's going on inside? There's that internal moment. Like, what does it leave in you? What does it leave behind?
I saw some imagery in some of your poems that actually touches on Islam. Too.
Right.
Like I said, the final Hajj, another one called Hijab, different ones that bring that up about the Middle East anyway, kind of flavor.
I've really, I've only visited the Islamic world once. I was in Morocco, but I've been fascinated when I've talked to people who visited there, who fought, or when I've talked to people who come from these cultures and whose lives are guided by the ideas of Islam. It's funny because I kind of looking at the span of people I've known and experiences I've had. I was having conversations with this guy, very right-wing veteran, who was very drawn to me because I'm a law enforcement officer, and he was like, you're a warrior and I'm a warrior, and and as we talked, he just turned out to be so incredibly Islamophobic. And I would go back and forth with him about this, and he had these very kind of fanciful ideas about Islam. So I had a Muslim partner at the time, and I was talking to him, and I said, I got to stop communicating with this guy. The things he's saying, I can't deal with this. And this friend of mine, he says, no, you have to teach him. And he said, I know you are not religious. I know you do not believe. He said, but I think he was given to you for a reason. And you have to teach him.
Okay.
And it was a fascinating. I mean, I was just kind of imagine these dynamics pulling back and forth. But and I kind of wanted to say, the reason I'm still talking to you is because a Muslim guy told me I'm supposed to fix you.
Well, there you go. I mean, another thing was said about your poet, that you like to have, or you're attracted to, that says is elemental and existential influences.
Okay, yeah. I mean, really, when people are stripped bare, I mean, who are you really? And it's funny, it's funny now that you just said that. I remember when we were training with our firearms, there was a bunker, like a frame. We're supposed to kind of get up, it's like a doorway, and we were supposed to get up to this. And someone wrote the words, "Who are you?" on the it's some piece of equipment. I don't know if it's still around somewhere on our range in Baltimore. But yeah, the idea of who people really are when you strip down the pretense. When I mean, I've seen people when their loved one just died. They watch their loved one die, or I've talked to officers after they've had to use force and things like that. And I mean, and of course, a big part of it is I've looked at myself when, who did I feel I was when I've had a moment where I've had to use force, or I've had to, deal with the fact I was so very angry with someone, or so very exhilarated, and it's like that moment. So is this you? Is it you when you've got all of your defenses up? Is that you because you're at your healthiest, or is this you because you're not? I'm always really drawn to that.
And you're going, I think, ultimately you're going for the truth.
Right.
In a sense, your true self, whoever that is at the time, or just the truth of a moment, or whatever it might be.
Right.
Now, I want to get into some of your poems, because I did, read them all, actually. And there were different ones that I liked. And there's certain ones, and I thought, you don't know if we have time to really read them all. I mean, I'm of the 8 or 9 that I like.
Okay, sure.
But even though they're rather short, all of them. But there were a few that really spoke to me. And I would think if there were times, and if you want to read them, or if you even have favorites that you like to read, but I'll tell you one of the ones that struck me very strongly was called Sometimes He Comes Down.
Oh, okay.
Do you want to read that one?
Sure. That was, I believe, in this one.
I think it's in both books, I think.
It's
or
in both
I'm not
books,
sure which
okay.
book it's in. Well, you'll find it.
Sure.
Actually, this one has at least this one at least has a table of contents.
Isn't that great? So see how
Sometimes He Comes Down in this one.
Progressed over time.
Yes, it is. I think it's page 38.
38, yes.
Yeah, Sometimes He Comes Down is a great one, I think. Okay. And what it says about what we've been talking about.
Sometimes he comes down. Sometimes he comes down from the bridge where they hanged him. He comes, still walking with that shuffle, as if his shoes are too big, snapping off twigs, looking through windows at the sleeping folk, the children, the wives, the men with lined faces. He comes, still playing with that one loose button he tried to stitch up the night before they came down to the bottoms looking for him, or some other buck field hand who'd do just as well. You know he's come down because you can feel the wind when there isn't supposed to be any, and the tall grass leans the wrong way. Sometimes the dogs get beside themselves, biting at their ropes and scratching to get back into the ramshackle houses. Sometimes he comes down through the reeds to cross the tracks, to climb the hill, and find those that did it, just to see how those old men sleep.
Now, certainly I think that's powerful, actually, very powerful.
Well, thank you.
I mean, the imagery, it certainly gives me is someone who had been lynched.
Right.
And, that was your inspiration there to say the guilt of the survivors kind of a thing many years later? Or, what is your meaning to that?
I've always been struck by, I like myth and folk tales and the stories of the South. They're so laden with pain and so laden with conflict, and so many cultures of storytellers came together there, whether it was West Africa or the British Isles and Native Americans, that these stories are alive there. And so, yeah, it does come down to this question of still looking for the human quality. The looking for the human quality, looking for the sense of empathy. I recently read how the men who lynched Emmett Till, after they were found not guilty, did an interview and said, "Yes, we lynched him, and here's why." The fact that this was so heavily laden in the culture there, that I imagine it taking on a life of its own. Because there would be the question, well, is there any guilt? You see some of these people interviewed years later and said, well, we had to do that, of course. Clearly. It's unfortunate we had to. This is what we do. This is our peculiar institution.
Right. And it was in the wind in your poem, too.
Exactly, right.
And the dogs could sense it. So that's why I thought that was a great poem. And then there was another one I liked very much. Was called, I think, Through Elephant Grass.
Oh, okay, right.
It might be in that one, too.
Yeah.
Okay. In that book.
There we go, 20. Yes. Through Elephant Grass. This is a story about the same man and the same town, only both grown older. The main street has sprouted like a forgotten potato, reaching out with eyes and fingers where there used to be empty fields. And the man in the diner now talks the way old men do, with broad shapeless hands that need thin air as though he were conjuring a djinn. He is still in love with the waitress who has blonde hair and skin like raw honey. And one night, when his third cup of coffee has come for free, he begins to talk about how he stumbled in the elephant grass at a bend in the road near Pleiku. When he stood up again, under a full moon that night, he saw that another man had joined him there. I still think he had those black pajamas they told us about, he tells her. And he conjures in that empty space again as he says how both of them stared at one another for a moment, then walked away that night, maybe deciding that the other was a ghost and that place in the road should be left to carry on for itself.
Which again is a powerful image about a veteran of Vietnam.
Right.
Was kind of remembering and saying, did this really, since it happened, a Vietnamese soldier and an American soldier see each other and not sure the other one's real.
Right.
They go the other way.
Exactly.
Or am I seeing a ghost?
Right.
And I don't know if it was a story you heard or something you made up.
I actually spoke to a Vietnam vet who said there was a lot of chaos. He was, running from point A to point B, and at one point he stumbles on a road and looks up and pretty sure he was looking at a Vietnamese soldier, and they just took off in different directions.
There you go.
And I thought, what would lead you to, was your impulse not to just open fire on this guy?
Yeah.
And there are so many great questions that are loaded in that.
Poem, sure.
Yeah. I just spoke to a former soldier who said that he heard, because you've got this, just tradition of storytelling amongst warriors, and that he spoke to a guy who said that he was in a special operations unit, and they were in a neutral country on R&R, all the guys together, and someone kept buying them drinks, and finally they looked over and realized they saw the North Vietnamese unit they had been hunting, and had been hunting them. They just kind of hailed one another and continued drinking.
That almost reminds you of the famous story that they made into a song about during World War I at Christmas, where I think the British and the Germans play soccer with one another.
It was yes, that was the first. I think it was the first Christmas. They had only been at war for a few months.
1914.
1914, yeah.
Yeah, and so it's sort of like that. Like, the North Vietnamese, we're not at war right now. We're both in this bar and say, hey, how you doing?
Right, exactly.
And then we'll pick up our guns tomorrow.
Right. And there's a commonality, like, well, we're probably both working class guys.
Yeah.
We're both warriors.
Yeah.
We're both, maybe guys who didn't want to be here right now, you know.
So that's interesting.
Yeah.
Now, I want to do three more.
Sure.
One more. I'll actually have you do two. I want to do one. But here's another one, and it's in this book.
Okay.
Cut Across the Body.
Yeah, this is...
It's early on in the book, I think.
Yeah, this is Masala Tea and Oranges is the name of this book.
Yes, Masala Tea and Oranges.
Yes, Masala Tea and Oranges. So, a cut across the body. Now, While you still sleep, I remember my first sensei telling me how the prisoners of samurai, when it was clear that the gleaming steel of a new sword would be tested on them, would sometimes eat rocks, a stone or two, maybe a handful of gravel, just to damage the craftsman's work as it opened them up, just to ruin the soul of a perfect straight edge.
See, that's great.
Thank you.
It's almost brief enough to be a haiku or something.
Right.
But
Thank you.
And what's the story behind that? Or do you have a story with that one or
Well,
not?
let me just, I was left with that image.
Oh.
I mean, as I was practicing martial arts, a teacher of mine told us about this.
Oh, that story?
Yes, this kesa cut that the samurai would sometimes do, and so sometimes someone would say, well, if they're going to open me up with this beloved sword of theirs, let me just ruin it. As it cuts through my belly,
swallow the stones.
Going to meet a stone, right? And I thought, wow, there's so much in that image. There's so, that's so loaded. Let me just throw it out there and see what I can make of it. And I thought, once again, often when people are so dedicated to conflict, that it's like this is going to live on beyond me, So what's going on in this relationship? What point is this relationship when it's that metaphor is what works best for the speaker,
And I don't know if you're influenced at all, because I used to do martial arts, in your poetry with the East and Eastern philosophy, because that to poems is great when you talk about let each person figure it out for themselves, like a Zen koan. There's no real answer, but it's something for you to reflect upon. And it's sort of, maybe you bring some of that into some of your poems.
I think so, because I found myself, I realized one day when someone said, what does that mean? That thing, what does that mean? And I was just like, it's really not a point for me to sit here and say that.
No.
Just like with my students when I taught, they would say, what's the right answer? I'm like, well, I want you to go back and read the material and think about it. Right.
Well, some of the things, there is not exactly one meaning.
One meaning, exactly.
It means what it means for you.
That's very important, right.
Now, two more poems, because I'm going to say shift the gears a little. You do have some sensuality in some of your poems.
Sure.
And I know often it seems like the image of bare feet comes up.
It's someone else brought that up to me,
yeah. So I'm not the first one to tell you that.
Right.
And but the two I have here, let me see, I put three down here, but there's, I think, one of the ones that I would have you read, because there's three of them. But maybe I'll give you the choice. Would you rather read Billiards or Beads?
Oh, you know what? Yeah, let's do Billiards.
Okay, let's do Billiards. That's in that book.
That's fun, yeah.
And then I have one of those central poems I want to read.
Okay. 34.
Someone asked me to read one, too.
Okay, great. Billiards. It is past noon on a Tuesday, and I find you shooting pool with the same old man as before. You have made a long rope out of your hair, and you talk sweetly to him, because he is the Dust Bowl man who walks the block. He is the bony, silent wisp of a Baltimore that knew milk wagons and colored-only signs, the one whose narrow eyes and thin, chapped mouth are always lost below the lip of a blue baseball cap. He is the one who talks to the black girls on their smoke breaks in the alley, telling them that he is such a dancer, such a lover, and is silent as you stretch yourself across the table to shatter a triangle of hard-colored balls. The tight cotton of your t-shirt rides up your body like it did the day before, showing him the beads that you wear and the North African tan of your waist. You whisper along with the jukebox music, bite your lower lip, squinting at the wedge of color on its green felt home. And before you break it, you arch your back and toss him the Rapunzel braid that has hung, waiting on the other side of your face.
Yeah, there you go.
The block.
Yes, the block.
During the day you find some interesting tableaus played out.
It's different day at night, I would think.
It is. It is and it's not.
Oh, okay.
It is and it's not.
Was that your beat at one point?
It wasn't. I worked in headquarters at various times.
So you're right near there.
So you were right next to it.
Gay Street, sure.
Yeah, sure. And I love it. Visitors, it's very Baltimore. Visitors find it fascinating. Like, so that's the police department? And
right by the block.
Yeah, right.
Like half a block away from the police department is the block.
Exactly. And So I would have occasion to walk through there, I would go to 7-Eleven to get my green tea, you know, and to walk through there and, you know, hey Gillespie, how are you? And, you know, girls walking in and out, people, you know, coming in and out. And I just happened, I was talking to one young lady who was just in a alleyway. Oh, hey, how are you? Fine. And she said, well, I got to go in and talk to this guy. And there was this older man who she would play pool with him.
Oh.
Every day. And it was just such a fascinating tableau that was played out. And I was wondering, you know, what did she mean to him? What did it mean to him to play pool with this very young, attractive woman? She was a very intelligent, fascinating woman, and I wondered what this guy's story was. And I often wondered about the stories of the people that were down there in the middle of the day.
Right.
You know, what was going on in their lives that they were down there in the middle of the day, and what was going on. And, you know, and how, and we talk about role playing. It's fascinating to talk about the question of who are you really versus the role that you're playing.
Exactly.
I mean, and you know, when you get to know some of the people that work down there, and because obviously the thing is constantly presentation and affect. So again, Baltimore as a character, just such amazing fodder.
So this was really about two real people.
Yeah,
that poem.
Right. People that I didn't really know, but I
Yeah,
just
but you
saw that moment. I
observed them,
observed,
didn't
yeah,
you?
yeah.
So I'll just find the one poem that I wanted to read. Let me see if I can find it. Oh, here it is. Actually, the last poem in this book. It's called Exhibit.
Ah.
And I like
okay.
that one. You should know that on days like this, I may want to show you off to the men. It will be in the summer, most likely, when the brown, squat men are digging up cobblestones and clanking their pickaxes against the rusty hides of pipes. It will be when they are taking their break, eating street food, watching the lunchtime women, and I will show you off to them. I will walk you past the dirty men, with their hands are full of stone and mud, and they will see that your hair is still wet, and that your thighs are thick in the faded jeans. They will know, somehow, that you wear no underwear when the weather is warm, and a current of muttered Spanish will run amongst them when we pass, because you are tall. I am touching the small of your back, and it is the height of summer.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What was that about?
Thank you very much. You know, that was one of those things you piece together. There's, you know, part of it was very much about the culture of not just men, but guys, kind of. And there's the culture of the moment. There's an unspoken moment that communicates amongst people. Sometimes just given that one of my martial arts teachers called it that elegant moment. And it's about that question of authenticity too. Saying, you know what, I just derive a sensual pleasure from this. And just understand that this is, you know, and I don't know if I'm even really advocating for this guy, for this speaker, but it's just about that speaker being completely authentic with this woman. And saying that there's something about his identity as a man that he has to fuel. So is she objectivized as that moment? Is he giving her a choice? Is he, you know, try to leave that open. But the pivotal point of it is him saying, this is something that's part of my personal culture. You know.
Well, I think part of it, what spoke to me was to say, it's a way of, you know, a gentleman is showing he's proud of his woman. Like he says, I'm showing you off. You know, not necessarily your possession, but I'm showing you off. I'm proud that you're on my arm or next to me. That kind of thing. You can interpret it that way.
I think so. Yeah, I think that, you know, it probably is one of those things that fits into several different psychological slots.
As good poems do.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Now, in the future, here we go. We're going to sum up that you say do you have other poems in you, and you said some prose stuff too?
I have another book I've put together, so I'm searching for a publisher for that.
The poems?
Yes.
Okay, book 3.
yes, book 3. Yes, I've got book 3. I've got that here.
Okay,
and
good. And prose?
I have some prose going. I have a novel. It's about 150 pages now.
Wow.
Kind of squaring away the first half of it, and then I've got another piece I'm going to do, and I've got a science fiction policing piece of going, kind of looking down the line at what would become of policing as cities grow and populations are more diverse, and
something like Blade Runner.
It's funny. I'm so struck. I mean, obviously, Blade Runner is one of those things that impacts you, and it's just there, right?
Yeah,
and so I always ask. I realize as I'm creating images, I'm like, okay, don't make it Blade Runner, but but you can't help but have these images of what a city would look like. So thank you to Philip K. Dick.
There you go.
Right.
Now the thing to do is then to say we will want to have you back when some of these things have been published, and we want to get it out there and get it promoted. We want to thank Ellen Cherry for letting us know about you. And
thank you, Ellen.
Because I know that it's all in the paper that the two of you were performing at that point at the Ivy Bookshop.
Yes.
And I said, well, I want her in, but then I also want him in because his life seems interesting. He has an interesting story to tell.
Thank you.
And you have.
Well, thank you.
Now, you let people here look in your camera, let them know about these two books, where to find them, and also your contact information, please.
Certainly. Well, this is on the later edition of Sancho Panza, which is one of the first poems in it, and that's available at the Ivy and at Atomic Books. And the cover is just a sword. Let's see if you can see this.
Yes.
It's got a katana. And this is called Masala Tea and Oranges. It's actually the first book that I did. And that's also at the Ivy and at Atomic Books. And I will be at BookFest on the 29th doing a panel.
In September?
Yes.
Terrific. We want to cover that one year. Maybe this will be the year.
Great. And so they're available at those two bookstores right now.
How about Amazon?
No.
No?
Not Amazon.
Just the bookstores.
Right.
Okay, and give folks your contact information, how to find and contact and talk to Edward Doyle Gillespie, and how much they love your poems and your books.
Thank you. Well, I'm on Facebook, and that's really probably the primary place to find me.
Is Facebook?
Is Facebook, right.
Under your name, Edward Doyle Gillespie.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes. That's probably the best way to hunt me down.
Okay. Great.
I know I need to get one of these author sites.
Yes, of course.
Of course.
So we want to thank you again.
Thank you so much.
All right, terrific.
It was a lot of fun.
Yeah, well, it was great to have you.
Thank you.
I was looking forward to this.
Very much, and I'm looking forward to coming back.
That's terrific. Because I say that, with I tell people, the bad things we've heard about crime in Baltimore, and some bad things we've heard recently in the last few years, bad things about the Baltimore police force, I said, interviewing you and having you on the show will give people something positive about Baltimore and positive about a member of our hardworking police force.
Thank you. Thank you so much. And I'm very proud to be a member, very proud to be in Baltimore. I think of it from Baltimore, and I've lived here for 22 years.
Right.
So I'm proud to claim Baltimore, and I'm proud to claim the agency. I'm very proud of being a Baltimore City cop.
Well, that's terrific. Well, folks, that's the end of the latest edition of Books and Authors, and we hope to have another one soon with another interesting author. In fact, maybe at the book convention or the other convention we're going to be attending in September. So stay tuned for some more interesting people who have written some interesting books. So until then, this is Paul Stefan saying, see you next time.
You're watching Books and Authors on TV Free Baltimore.
Hello, I'm Steve Darnall, the publisher of Nostalgia Digest, and you're watching TV Free Baltimore. Well done.
The Despacito is on my shore, Maryland, my Maryland. His torch is at thy temple door, Maryland, my Maryland. Avenge the patriotic roar that fleck the streets of Baltimore, and be the battle queen of yore, Maryland, my
This concludes another day of live stream broadcasting from TV Free Baltimore.